Ah yes, Schlocktober, my favorite part of the job during what's typically my favorite time of year, during a year when my ability to feel even good, much less favor about anything, has been effectively diminished to the point of zero by a lot of things. But with a lot of places effectively canceling the Halloween experience altogether this year in light of, the whole plague situation, one figures any semblance of the season that can exist in this hopefully temporary stasis, as it had before, has responsibility to do so, and that certainly includes Schlocktober, though that does beg another question. The gimmick here is to showcase the weird, obscure, often not necessarily good but memorable films from all over the spectrum, but given the time of year and the thematics at play, that typically means scary movies, horror films, certain amount of darkness, and is that necessarily something people are looking for when the world is going through a global crisis and people are on edge and surrounded by existential misery and despair and all-consuming horror, and that's just anyone who works in the White House right now. So this year things will be a bit on the lighter side. We're steering clear of things grim, bleak, or genuinely depraved in favor of, well, still cheesy, but also breezy. Monsters, gore, and especially schlock, and at least one entry that's still pretty gnarly, just, not in a super problematic way, but erring on the side of fun. To wit, we're leading off with 1994's Tammy and the T-Rex.
What do you want?
A movie that top-billed star Denise Richards, star of Blonde and Blonder, Cougars Incorporated, former Mrs. Charlie Sheen during the really bad phase of Mr. Charlie Sheen, and featured cast member of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills seasons 9 through 10, spent years refusing to talk about having appeared in. So it's good. The kind of movie where when you get the opening credits back and they've misspelled the main character's name and printed the incorrect rest of the title, you decide it's okay to, just leave it like that.
Dinosaur music inside my brain. Sometimes I feel like I'm gonna go insane. Dinosaur music inside my brain. Sometimes I feel like I'm going insane. I feel the rumble.
Ooh, okay, so maybe this one is a little bit sad. Yeah, that's a very, very young, the late Paul Walker, as Tammy's would-be love interest, Michael, who, because this is a 90s teenage movie, is a nice guy whose life is in danger, because the girl he's sweet on is also pursued by a psychotic stalker bully that no one's really doing anything about for some reason. Possibly because in this universe, people fight like this. I'm also confused about this clique. Are these the popular kids? The gangsters? The punks? Are they the weirdos? Are they a gang? This is clearly an affluent Southern California suburb, and some of them look rich, but not all of them. But it doesn't seem to be the leader kid, so it's not like an evil snob and his group of paid lackeys. Anyway, their revenge on Michael is to strand him in what looks to be, I think, a big cat preserve, where he gets mauled by a lion and almost dies. Yeah, and while in the hospital, he gets abducted by a German mad scientist and his henchwoman lover because they want to steal his brain and put it into a super strong mechanical body of a robot Tyrannosaurus. What, is this moving too fast for everybody?
Show me its power! I will give you a brain! I will give you immortality!
Because the movie is called Tammy and the T-Rex, and it's a high-concept teen comedy about a hot chick whose boyfriend's mind is in the body of a dinosaur, but the animatronic dinosaur puppet is so fake-looking they decided, fuck it, we'll just have it be a robot in the actual movie.
Let me see it move.
Okay, so here's how this happened. That whole random thing with the big cats, that's because this was thrown together on the quick by a longtime Hollywood side player named Stuart Rafel, who primarily raised and trained exotic animal performers for movies, sometimes his own, and was also responsible and or guilty of directing Mac and Me, around about 1993, a South American movie theater entrepreneur who had sold an animatronic T-Rex lobby prop he'd owned to a Texas theme park was apparently shopping the thing around LA, looking to rent it to any film producers who wanted to team up and bang out a Jurassic Park cash-in on the quick in between shipping stops, and Rafel said, yeah, sure, let's do that. Tammy and the T-Rex is what they came up with, since the guy didn't really have a script to make with the dinosaur, he just had the dinosaur and a let's make a movie really fast idea, and it's pretty much what you're picturing.
Michael gave it to me. You knew Michael?
What is that?
Michael, I'm so sorry, honey. I'm so sorry. We're gonna find you another body. I promise, okay? I promise. I love you so much.
You stole the goddamn dinosaur! He's my friend and I'm keeping it! You see it, Sheriff?
Yeah, I see it. Damn that broken ride.
Bastard!
Just leave him alone!
Hold your fire!
Except one thing. Okay, if you've seen this movie before, you might not have seen that scene. See, they actually shot this movie as an R-rated film with several very elaborate gory death scenes from Michael the Dinosaur tearing shit up.
You gotta fix this, Billy. He's kidding around.
But for its main release in the US, the producers took out all the bloody parts and marketed it as a family movie instead. As you can imagine, since what remains is still a bad-on-purpose comedy dinosaur movie, puns with slapstick aimed at older teenagers and excuses to gawk at the eventual star of Wild Things, in a manner that will lead you to run the numbers, which I did, and she was apparently about 22 here. It was not very good in this form, basically incoherent, and nobody really liked it. Like, it was an infamously bad movie that no one involved wanted to talk about.
So, you want a little action?
Oh, yeah. I've been waiting all day.
Playground, just wasted at that sea.
All right, David.
I want you.
No more.
I need you.
No more.
I'm gonna screw your brains out of you.
Anyway, last year, specialty DVD label Vinegar Syndrome restored the uncut version for retail because why not? And you know, it actually does make a shocking amount of difference.
I'm a T-Rex. T-Rex want a cracker? Hear me in there? Hello? Anybody home?
Like, the movie still isn't good because it's still Tammy and the T-Rex, but you can now also tell definitively that it was never supposed to be good, if that makes sense. Viewed in context as a purposefully stupid self-parody of exactly the kind of locally produced Hollywood backyard cash grab that it is, with the genuinely entertaining ultraviolence matched to the extended sex gags and recurring bits like Richards and her genre-mandatory 90s ostentatious gay black friend constantly entering scenes having just changed into preposterously elaborate new outfits. I mean, it's no Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, but it's basically working at what it wants to do. The two villains are actually a particular highlight. Ellen Dubin and Terry Kaiser. He plays Bernie in the Weekend at Bernie's movie.
Right here. Watch this one. Watch this. Ah, we have to remember this one. Live! Well, that's it. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I did all I could.
Have great chemistry, and you know, the whole bad guy couple who suck at their job but are actually very good at their relationship is always kind of a really winning dynamic, and it's weird more things don't use it, right? Like, be honest, in terms of personality, Team Rocket kind of carry the Pokemon anime, right?
Helga, cue my rope.
Oh, Gunther.
In any case, now that it's more widely available, you can check out the uncut Tammy and the T-Rex yourself. It's certainly unique and good for a laugh. Next week, Schlocktober continues. Happy Halloween. Or at least we're gonna try. A A few weeks ago, before the show was in Schlocktober period, we ran an episode about the accidental symbolism of seeing the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic cause 2020 to become the first year in over a decade where the Marvel Cinematic Universe had released no films to theaters, i.e. the idea of heroes that are supposed to watch over and protect people taking a year off, juxtaposed against the year where the institutions of government, healthcare, law, and basic institutional security all seem to do the same in real life. This was, of course, deliberately misconstrued by those incapable of reading for subtext, context, or metaphor, and probably also just incapable of reading, period, judging by the grammar and the feedback, as being a literal lament for not being able to watch superhero movies. But anyway, on the other hand, it does kinda suck to have lacked for the whole capes and fight scenes thing for a while, right? So let that be our somewhat awkward segue to 1968's The Batwoman.
¡Quietos!
Igor, quítale la máscara.
Okay, so obviously this is not an official adaptation of any version of the multiple DC Comics properties referred to as Batwoman. Rather, this is a Mexican wrestling or lucha libre action horror sci-fi superhero hybrid of the type that became enormously popular in Mexico and also South America, and parts of Europe, particularly Italy, in the 1960s and 70s as popular masked luchadors like Il Santo and the Blue Devil spun off their superhero-like ring characters into comics, which in turn became famously wacky films usually starring themselves. This in turn led to low-budget superhero films produced elsewhere, mostly Italy, because...
Hey, Meg, let's go a two-player. I got the Luigi here, huh?
Hey, Meg! Mario said you were into a weird stuff.
To borrow elements of the lucha aesthetic and wrestling plot details like Super Argo, the Three Fantastic Supermen, Goldface, Flashman, etc., and oh, of course, this was also driven by the jointly occurring international mega popularity of the Adam West Batman show, which, as everyone likes to forget, still happened, was a massively successful and influential thing. So, the Batwoman, while being an authentic Mexican production set and filmed on location in Acapulco, the main character is played by Italian actress Maura Monti, and while Batwoman is a wrestler whose ring gear is in fact essentially an Adam West Batman outfit just without the copyright-infringing insignia, whereas her superhero uniform is just the cape and cowl over a bikini and boots because movie.
Lo siento, por favor.
Bueno, ya se metió. El caso debe ser difícil desde el momento en que llamaron a la mujer Murciélago. Bueno, apunta eso.
El resultado de la autopsia, inspector.
Monty herself was not, and the wrestling element is mainly here as part of the film's plot, as we're informed in addition to being a fabulously wealthy single woman, master detective and crime fighter as the film opens, Batwoman is also the queen of all sports.
Dotada de unas cualidades poco comunes, en corto tiempo logró dominar todos los deportes. Y bajo una máscara y el apodo de la mujer Murciélago se convirtió en una extraordinaria luchadora.
Okay, that kinda seems like she's the queen of one sport and a handful of outdoor athletic activities. I mean, still impressive, but still. Also, nobody really knows who's under the mask except for a pair of Mexican government and law enforcement guys who subcontract to her when they have crimes that need busting requiring a bat-themed superheroine. Also, she seems to keep them on hand to flirt but not sleep with because Mexican movies of this era tended to be super horny but also super chaste about it.
Son muchachos, mátenlo por favor. Hay un ratón, por favor, mátenlo. Está horrible, mátelo, mátalo.
Anyway, she's called into Acapulco because they keep finding dead wrestlers with their pineal glands cut out, and eventually someone figures out that was weird. To spare you the detective details, and also because the movie just tells you right up front anyway, a mad scientist headquartered in a not-suspicious-at-all ship called the REPTILICUS is using extracted human pineal fluids to create human-fish gill-man hybrid monsters to rule the ocean, and he's only kidnapping and cutting up wrestlers because he requires physically perfect specimens.
That just raises further questions!
So Batwoman goes undercover in the local wrestling scene, which is odd because everyone already knows that the Batwoman who fights crime is also the Batwoman who wrestles.
Te felicito, Esmeralda. Cada día aprendes más. Gracias a tus consejos. Hasta luego. Adiós.
Occasionally engages the villains in battle. eventually discovers and battles the full-grown monster until the bad guys decide that they should use her to create a female Gillman.
Encendió una antorcha submarina. Lo va a quemar.
¡Me está persiguiendo el monstruo!
¿Pero cuál monstruo?
¡Ahí está!
Quiero que sea precisamente Piscis quien me la traiga. Y después, mi venganza será terrible, terrible.
And otherwise people in this movie just kinda hang around on the beach, the hotel, and go diving a whole lot.
De todos modos, ha llegado el momento de entrar en acción. Avisaré al inspector para que con un grupo de agentes allane el barco.
¿Y qué les vas a decir? ¿Que viste un monstruo con rasgos humanos y cuerpo de pez? Nadie te lo va a creer, Mario.
Es verdad.
Remember, in the mid-60s, you couldn't just look up any picture of anything anywhere you wanted, so a major part of the appeal of both disposable exploitation flicks like this and big-budget stuff like the globe-hopping James Bond movies was literally getting to see places. And while obviously a big part of the sales pitch here is certainly Monty herself, inarguably a lovely actress whom we see a lot of in her Batwoman costuming or lack thereof, the filmmakers really do shoot the hell out of the location. I mean, until the monster shows up looking a lot less impressive than the creature from the Black Lagoon did a decade earlier, you could be forgiven for thinking this was a bigger budget movie than it was just based on the surroundings. Otherwise, the Batwoman is pleasantly forgettable outside of the Axel Braun makes a 60s Disney comedy aesthetic that takes over any scene where Batwoman is just standing around in her sexy Halloween spirit knockoff cosplay, but there's enough going on and it's exactly silly enough to make for a good bad movie night staple, though an official release in the US is hard to come by.
Vas a presenciar lo más grandioso del siglo. De las aguas del mar hace más de 400 millones de años, emanó el principio de la raza humana. Al surgir a la vida, el primer vertebrado, el pez. Partiendo de esa base haremos la regresión hacia los albores de la evolución y crearemos a imagen y semejanza de nuestros antecesores primarios, la humana criatura anfibia.
When you reach exceed your grasp, but only just a little bit, you end up with Destroyer, a mostly forgotten slasher movie of the genre's later period that's definitely better than most of its peers, but not necessarily, like, much better. Cold opening in a particularly grim-looking prison's death row, where something seems just a bit stylistically off already, we're introduced to Lyle Alzado as a hulked-up, super-strong serial killer Ivan Mujer, sentenced to be electrocuted for, well, kinda all the things.
Ivan Mujer, you've been sentenced to die in the electric chair for the rape and murder of 23 men, women, and children. You having last statements?
24.
Try this son of a bitch.
But seemingly more concerned with watching his favorite game show. There's some foreshadowing involved there, but mostly it's just because Ivan is really, really strong and the chair is not actually enough to kill him.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, sins.
I should probably mention up front that at the time, this was meant as a bit of celebrity stunt casting. Alzado was a by then retired NFL defensive end who, in his days as a player for the Denver Broncos, Cleveland Browns, and LA Raiders, was one of American professional football's last great infamous berserkers on the field, known for an aggressive and violent playstyle that not only overcame but simply intimidated his opponents, earning him the nicknames Darth Raider and 3 Mile Lyle.
He's a face right out of cave drawings. You imagine John the Baptist looking like this, Joshua, the Old Testament prophets.
I'm a violent person. I play a violent game. And anybody who tells me that they go out there to have fun playing football, they're a liar. Because this game isn't fun. This game is a war.
He sees himself surrounded by evil. He howls at injustice. He's not a defensive end, he's an archangel.
He's one of the few men in the NFL who has achieved the destruction of a training machine.
I broke it.
Well, by most accounts, Alzado left all his aggression on the field and was a perfectly decent guy otherwise. His reputation as a raging man-beast followed him in the post-NFL popular culture, which he parlayed into a minor acting career in roles like this, Destroyer probably being the one that took the fullest advantage of his physicality and persona. Anyway, it turns out it was just a nightmare.
What a pretty picture's a bitch.
Specifically, the nightmare of Deborah Foreman, here playing a stunt woman working on a currently shooting movie written by her boyfriend, Clayton Rohner. Why is she having nightmares about a serial killer who, it turns out, was executed several years ago? Because the project is a cheesy women in prison movie being shot in the now condemned actual self-same prison where Ivan Mosier was executed. And since the writer doesn't necessarily have much to do on a movie set hour to hour, our heroine's boyfriend has opted to occupy his time researching the suspicious prison riot that supposedly closed the place down to begin with, which may or may not have been touched off by dirty secrets about abusive administration and or had something to do with the circumstances of Ivan Mosier's execution. Rounding out the victim pool are a snobby lead actress Foreman is doubling for, a spaced out weirdo special effects technician because there's really only like a handful of movies about making movies observational humor jokes, and that's one of them, a corrupt southern warden who's having second thoughts about letting an entire film crew set up shop in his obvious crime scene.
I don't want anybody questioning my men about it. I don't want to have to come back out here. Better luck on your next picture, Miss Fox.
A creepy old man security guard way too obviously relieved that there's no Velma Dinkley in the bunch to figure this whole thing out, and Psycho's Anthony Perkins clearly having a lot of fun doing a meta bit as a director who clearly knows he's above this material but is making the effort anyway.
Sharon, darling, can you in all honesty call that running?
Oh, I don't have to jump. I get paid to act.
Oh, that's what you call that.
All right, roll it!
Jesus, it's Crawford and Davis and Baby Jane. Who?
Frick.
Brilliant. We should be getting this on film.
Man, they really should have let this guy do more comedy.
Pretend that you've just broken a nail, or that Playboy just discovered some porno films from early in your career, but like, give it something, okay?
Anyway, since you'd be pretty disappointed were this not the case, yes, Ivan Mosier, either as a specter, simply too hard to kill revenant, or something else in between, is still haunting the shadows of the prison, has kind of a poorly developed Phantom of the Opera thing happening for Foreman, and otherwise just starts picking off the cast, crew, and other assorted folks at regular intervals in suitably brutish, occasionally ironic fashion. Jackhammer weapon prominently displayed on the poster art, really actually only getting deployed in one scene. The noteworthy feature of Mosier as a slasher villain is clearly that he doesn't really slash anybody. He's mostly a big, absurdly strong dude who just beats the shit out of you and then finishes you off either with brute strength or whatever tool is on hand. That's probably part of why Destroyer didn't catch on like other would-be franchise starters of its type. 80s and 90s horror loved its stabbing and slicing novelty edge weapons, and Ivan Mosier is much more of a deliberate feeling throwback to the earlier days of the Stalker Killer, where the fear was just being manhandled or strangled to death by a big mindless brute like the Frankenstein monster, the Mummy, or Rondo Hatton's Creeper. Instead, Destroyer is content to rely on a grab bag of movie set stuff and prison stuff for its theming, along with Alzado's not unsubstantial angry guy charisma to get the job done. And while you don't end up remembering much about the movie beyond the kills and Perkins zingers, I kind of feel like if they'd made more installments with this killer, there were places to take it.
What happened to your uniform?
It's not a uniform. It's a disguise.
Disguise from who? Hey, a disguise from who?
You.
Unfortunately, that wouldn't be in the cards. While still an intimidating physical presence in this film, his other roles and various commercial endorsements he'd appeared in at the time, Alzado was not in peak physical health towards the end of the 1980s, largely believed to be related to steroid use during his NFL days. In fact, he was one of the most prominent American sports figures to publicly admit to using anabolic steroids throughout his career, a practice now known to have been rampant in professional athletics in the 60s and 70s, when the issue scandalously exploded in the 90s. By that point, Alzado was battling advanced brain cancer, at which he always contended was brought on or exacerbated by steroid. Many medical experts would disagree over the years, and growth hormone. He passed away in 1992, 4 years after making Destroyer. He was only 43 years old. In 2014, the NFL Films documentary Lyle Alzado, A Football Life, included interviews with teammates and family members who reaffirmed his reputation as a gentle giant off the field, who'd raised millions for children's charities in particular during his downtime, with his brother and sister attributing both those actions, his need to become a physical powerhouse and play combatively, stemming all from a brutal childhood under their own alcoholic father. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to end that on a down note. That's just kind of what happened in this guy's life, unfortunately. In any case, Destroyer isn't exactly as hard to see as it was for a bit, and it's unique enough to be novel, and certainly a tribute to what could have been a very interesting horror lead career for this person. So definitely worth checking out. This was our darker movie for this year. Next week, a much more colorful but also much more bizarre entry, which I'm very excited to show you. People will tell you correctly that the Japanese giant monster or kaiju genre took a turn away from quasi-serious science fiction, disaster movie territory toward being more family-friendly action-adventure films with an eye specifically on the child audience that bought up action figures of Godzilla and company toward the end of the 1960s and full-on into the 70s, not always as a criticism. Indeed, many have argued that the greater willingness to embrace the whimsical side of sci-fi so wholeheartedly on A-tier budget is what helped make Japan's big-screen genre fare of the era so distinctive and in demand. It's simply a clear, observable fact. Less clear are the influences that drove this change in the first place, though chief among the contributing factors was likely the genre coming to most prominently be represented in the national psyche overall on children's television, and that was due overwhelmingly to the legacy of the man arguably most responsible for bringing Godzilla and the ensuing kaiju genre to life in the first place. Japanese special effects legend and all-around cinema veteran Eiji Tsuburaya, who pioneered the suitmation and miniature photography techniques used to create the Toho giant monster menagerie, along with dozens of other practical special effects techniques considered distinct to Japan in that era, and subsequently took his expertise to television in his final years as his Tsuburaya Productions established itself as a powerhouse in Japanese television with the trend-setting Ultraman franchise, which probably did more than anything to establish giant monster sci-fi and the rest of the so-called tokusatsu genre as most popular by far with a kid audience. After all, Godzilla movies at their peak were coming out at a clip of about once a year or so, whereas Ultraman was on TV every week. In any case, while Tsuburaya Productions kept its focus to the world of TV and tie-in features from their TV programming for the most part, they did take in the odd swing at original theatrical productions as well, occasionally in collaboration with their founders' old mates at Toho. And that was the sort of arrangement that resulted in our subject for today, a genuinely strange obscurity with the ignominious distinction of being the only Toho-produced kaiju feature to have never received any official release or language translation outside of Japan, and remember, they were okay with everyone knowing about Godzilla's revenge.
Why'd you come here?
I just wanted to see you.
Your folks will get kind of worried, won't they?
I don't think so. They're hardly home any time at all.
Gabra!
Gabra?
Himself! Let's get out of here!
But yes, 1972's Daigoro Vs Goliath is probably the most overtly kid-targeted kaiju production Toho signed its name to prior to the rebirth of Mothra movies in the 90s. It's brightly filmed, the cinematography is colorful, the characters are played for broad comedy slapstick, and the production design is packed with wacky Rube Goldberg props, amusement park gags, and a general toy maker vibe that feels heavily indebted to Western surreal absurdist family comedies of the period like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, opening in media res with a hapless inventor failing to win an invention contest with a flying bicycle after explaining that he competes in such events in the first place to raise money for Daigoro the Hungry Monster, which is apparently a matter of some controversy. A series of flashbacks then fills in what that's all about. Evidently, a number of years ago, a submarine accident roused a female sea monster from her sleep and caused her to attack the Japanese coast, and for a change, conventional weapons were enough to kill one of these. Unfortunately, it was subsequently discovered that the monster in question had recently given birth and was likely acting in self-defense, leading the Japanese government and regretful citizenry to agree to assume care for the now orphaned cub, which they've named Daigoro, setting him up on a small island reserve with his own personal handler, food supply, and ginormous outhouse. Okay, interesting place to decide to answer the mechanics of how one of these things takes a shit, but fine. Also, yeah, that's our star attraction for the 85 minutes this runs, so now you're probably getting a good sense of why there aren't 6 or 7 more Daigoro versus movies. Still, as far as the bipedal, pangolin, hippo, dinosaur story is concerned, happy ending under the circumstances? Well, no, because fast forward something like a decade and this is a 70s kids movie, so it's actually kind of cynical. あなたは彼のために少し寄付したいと思いませんか？寄付？寄付は嫌いですよ。お願いします。部長さん。してあげなさいよ。かわいそうよ。部長？あら失礼。社長さんかしら。社長だなんて。寄付なさいよ気前よく。ありがとうおばさん。おばさん？10円10円。In fact, it's by far the most interesting thing about it. For a movie that's tonally playing on the very simple, straightforward attention spans and moral conscience of the average 6-year-old, its presentation of the grown-up world of early 70s Japan is relentlessly bleak. The main plot driver for about 2/3 of the film is that society's desire to do right by Daigoro has pretty much worn out. He isn't a novelty anymore, he's getting too big, and it's starting to cost the government too much to feed him, and public backlash against raising taxes even a little bit to do so is so strong. Oh, much like Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster from 1 year earlier, this was a message movie. 減らせば大五郎は3年間暮らせるのです。あと何年この地球で生きていくことができるんじゃろう。100年、50年。いや、海の次に空を失えばもう生きていくことはできんのじゃ。That the discourse among pretty much everyone, save for an activist community of mostly children, has boiled down to, should we euthanize the one-of-a-kind living thing that we orphaned, or just start putting drugs into his food non-consensually that will stunt its growth? と言って、これが病気で死んでくれりゃともかく、薬で殺し。いやー、とにかくね、成長を止めるという考えが一番いいよ。何が経済大国だい。動物一匹食わせる金をケチケチケチケチしやがってよ。私にはできません。私には。何も殺そうってんじゃありませんよ。これがもしお宅のお子さんだったらどうなんです。 Because nothing says whimsical children's fantasy like allegories for austerity politics, and played in very stark terms via subplots about Daigoro's morally conflicted zookeeper and his managers, and the wacky inventor's best friend, an alcoholic carpenter who becomes a fierce Daigoro advocate who then goes cold turkey so he can give the money he saved to the cause, only to have his wife spend it out from under him. Anyway, that all gets upended because the other monster you've been expecting to show up because its name was in the title shows up, and yeah, you know where this is going, and we are in fact doing the full Rudolph here. Hey, buddy, sorry we went all Harrison Bergeron on you back there, but there's kind of a mutual problem only you can solve, so we good? And let it not be said that the outlandishness of the rest of the film eases up at all during the finale, which, along with both monsters looking thoroughly ridiculous and not at all suited for combat, features odd details like the humans trying to throw a tarp over Goliath's laser-emitting horn, and a kid-friendly solution for getting rid of him altogether. According to apocryphal monster movie lore, Goliath's role in the story was originally meant to be filled by a guest-starring Godzilla himself, but Toho changed their mind at some point for some reason. To date, the film is still not officially available outside of Japan, but it's easier to find than it used to be, and it's definitely an experience. And next week, I've got at least one more of those for you. So, big last couple weeks, huh? Lot of changes. Hopefully a few more good ones to come, knock on wood. So let's close out the Schlocktober roster this year in a big extended way. Not simply with one movie, but an entire franchise. Okay, so the reason we don't usually get movies with a ton of sequels and related material on this sub-series, except I think maybe like Puppet Master, is because if they were popular and noteworthy enough to get that kind of spread, they probably wouldn't be obscure or unusual enough to make a good Schlocktober episode. But Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is somewhat unique in that while it's managed to generate a pretty decent amount of media, and I feel like most people are vaguely aware that it exists, or at least they've heard the title floating around in the ether, not that many of those most people ever actually saw much, or like any of it. It's this strange artifact of late boomer, early Generation X indie underground cult movie iconography that started out culturally ubiquitous without being tangibly omnipresent for an absurdly long time, given what it was, then got to be actually everywhere for a hot second at the start of the 90s when it seemed like anything vaguely memorable could be turned into a merchandising thing.
We need Rambo! The force of freedom! Here's a present, Haddock! Wow! Look out! Rambo! The force
Rambo and General Warhawk with their battle action weapons, each sold separately.
And then, well, okay, it turned out maybe everything but this, and yet it's still kicking around, seemingly on the strength of No Way for Real, That Can't Be a Real Movie, still working after all these years. But okay, here's how this happened. While taking a film class in the mid-70s at UC Davis, a trio of friends, John DeBello, Costa Dillon, and Stephen Peace, shot a 15-minute spoof of 50s-style monster movies called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, apparently with the initial intent of riffing on the Japanese horror classic Matango, which had been released in the US as Attack of the Mushroom People. It was well received, and later, having gone into business as a budget film production company, they opted to take a shot on an original feature by expanding the idea to theatrical length.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes! Attack of the Killer Tomatoes! They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch, and finish you off for dinner or lunch.
The result was effectively a bad-on-purpose, intentionally low-budget takeoff on disaster-style monster movies, but with a broad and decently mined bit of satire where the typically competent, effective government military response to the monster as depicted in the played-straight 50s versions is replaced by gridlocked, malfunctioning 70s bureaucracy.
You know whose ass is on the line? Yours, mine, and the entire ag department.
I won that one in a three-legged sack race, last Armed Forces Day picnic. What's the matter with General Number 2? Oh, he was out all night on maneuvers. Let him rest.
The Senate Investigating Committee is called to order. Anybody remember what we're supposed to be investigating?
I apologize for the size of this room, gentlemen. It's all I can do on such short notice.
Beyond that, it's basically a one-joke movie. Here's a stock scene from a monster movie you recognize, but instead of a monster, tomato.
That's right, man. It's nothing to run in Desmond's stupid enough.
But they tell it differently enough in enough different ways that it doesn't wear out the welcome. They incorporated this actual helicopter stunt gone wrong into the movie because miraculously nobody got hurt, so it wasn't in bad taste to do so, which makes it look more expensive than it actually was, and believe it or not, this actually made it out before Airplane. And I would argue that the escalation reveal is kind of a legitimately brilliant joke.
I'm afraid, gentlemen, that what we have here before us isn't what we thought.
You don't mean...
This, may God help us, is a cherry tomato.
So it's basically an innocuous, fun, goofy prank of a movie. They finished it, they sold it, they released it into distribution where it did pretty good business on the drive-in and small theater circuit, particularly in the American South and Midwest, and in part because it could play as a midnight movie and a mostly safe kid matinee movie since it wasn't actually all that gory, adult, or even dark humor.
Dr. Nokatafu, would you please explain the project to the general?
What we have developed is, in essence, a half-man, half-robot. A very sophisticated combination of human intelligence and superhuman powers, which we are confident will result in the ultimate destruction of the enemy.
You better bring your coat. There's a little Jap in the air.
He needs nip.
With the obvious exception, of course, that it wouldn't be an otherwise good movie from the 70s if there wasn't at least one cringe-inducing racist joke that just absolutely would and should not fly today. But otherwise, deals got closed up, everybody made their money, that should have been the end of it, But then the first of two implausible events happened. Right around that same time, film critic, early trash cinema connoisseur, and yes, future embarrassing right-wing nutcase Michael Medved and his brother Harry found out about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and approached Costa de Bello and Peace about getting a print of the film for a festival based around the then-recent book The 50 Worst Movies Ever Made, and they agreed on the condition that their film be awarded the title specifically of the worst movie ever made about vegetables.
Across the length and breadth of the nation, the tomatoes continue on their rampage of wanton destruction. Even the mere mention of the word is sufficient to induce panic.
Tomato.
The Medved brothers agreed, and this stunt got the name of the film into the national small press, then the national big press. Local and national media started reporting on, basically, hey, did you know that there's a real movie out there called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes? Isn't that funny? As a feel-good human interest story, late-night comedy hosts started doing jokes about it, and had people associated with the production on the shows, and basically, yeah, this was Sharknado before Sharknado.
The campy, over-the-top sci-fi original movie is tearing through the Twitterverse with a bite. At its peak, more than 5,000 #Sharknado tweets per minute.
The Twitter buzz around Sharknado surpassed even the Red Wedding.
Hollywood stars, cult and bandwagon fans, and critics alike all had something to say.
This one's pretty funny.
Even Red Cross Oklahoma took to Twitter with, if it were to happen, it would be in Oklahoma. Why? Because we're tough like that.
I think we're just all stunned that we did something right.
A social media blockbuster in a summer full of flops.
Except whereas Sharknado got to cash in on the improbable hyper-awareness right away because of the social media age, the Killer Tomatoes basically went dormant once people found, other random silly stuff to laugh at, and everyone involved went back to their regular business. For the filmmakers, that went back into mostly commercial short filmmaking and sports reels. And then it was about a full decade until improbable event number 2, which involved, I shit you not, the Muppet Babies. Okay, so to keep this at a reasonable length, one of the reasons the whole anything can be a merchandise powerhouse if you push it hard enough ethos became so prominent in the 80s is that when the Hollywood studio machine was rebuilding itself at the end of the 70s, it was doing so largely out of a crop of quick-thinking new young executives who, with the previous system somewhat in ruins when they were starting their careers, had to do their early breaking in the low-budget exploitation movie game under longtime B-list pros like Roger Corman and Sam Arkoff. Corman himself specifically had parlayed that into a solid midlife second wind as the head of New World Pictures, which had a pretty good success as a budget film label, but really solid success for a while as a television brand. One of its prized subsidiaries was the animation studio Marvel Productions, the rebranded name of the former DePatie Freeling Animation Studios, because that was the sort of business deal Marvel was striking back then, which in turn produced the original 80s animated shows based on various Marvel Comics properties, Transformers, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, many others, and Muppet Babies, which had a gimmick of incorporating live-action movie footage into the characters' dream and make-believe sequences, and in 1987, the episode The Weirdo Zone made one of those movie references, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
We interrupt this cartoon for a special bulletin. Silly tomatoes are attacking everywhere looking for lousy comedians. The silly tomatoes are taking over the planet, chasing people from their homes, invading the oceans, attacking the armed forces. Waka waka waka!
I did it! I saved the world from the silly tomatoes! Wow! Oh.
That episode, in turn, became one of the better received of that season, and apparently generated an uptick in interest in whatever the movie with the big tomatoes was among the show's audience significant enough for the producers to take notice, and as one would expect from a company birthed by Roger Corman himself, their initiative was to call up the filmmakers and ask, hey, do you want to make a sequel?
fortune and fame.
So 10 years later, yeah, they actually did Return of the Killer Tomatoes, which picks up an in-universe 10 years after the Tomato Wars, and is this time all about mad scientist Dr. Gangrene, played by John Astin, using mad science to evolve tomatoes into humanoid super soldiers, and also one would-be sex slave for himself named Tarabumdier.
You wouldn't believe what she can do with 6 milk bottles and a tuning fork.
That's Karen Mistal, later Karen Waldron. You might remember her from Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death and recurring guest roles on Baywatch and Coach in the 90s, who instead escapes and joins up with the good guys, mainly the nephew of one of the heroes from the original movie.
You wish sex now?
Yes. No. Did you maybe fall down and bump your head hard? Maybe did your mother drop you when you were a baby? Do you speak much English?
I speak perfect English. I also cook 815 international dishes, perform 637 sexual acts, and use all the popular home appliances. Shall I cook you something?
And his friend, played by some actor named George something, who I'm sure nobody ever heard from again.
That's... I had a heck of a time finding you here.
Told you I'd be at the shoe store. Think your buddy, you think your pal, your roommate
Schmuck.
here? What, you think that I'm going to leave you out in the cold? You
Yes.
think that I'm going to leave you out in the... No? All right. Well, then, how about, see those over there? That's Tiffany. There's room for another judge.
No thanks. If I want a girl, I don't need your help.
Okay, all right. Suit yourself. Ladies, did I mention the Playboy centerfold opportunity?
Whereas the original was more of a National Lampoon Zucker Brothers style genre spoof, this was more of a straight comedy, spoofing on Spielbergian 80s fantasy action tropes, common to the era: dorky hero, oversexed buddy, out-of-his-league damsel, even a merchandisable sidekick animal in F.T. the Fuzzy Tomato. Not nearly as inspired as the first one, but there's fun to be had, and the cast all seem to know exactly what kind of movie they're in.
What do you really know about tomatoes anyways, huh? I mean, how would you feel if you'd been raised to be eaten? Wouldn't you rebel at the first opportunity?
You will never know what it is to love or be loved. Emotions are for people, not vegetables.
The driver is following us, or her.
But I think you're imagining things.
I don't imagine garbage trucks.
The mouth, perfect. The eyes are never right.
Professor Gangrene?
What? This is real life. This isn't some game. Honey.
I'll take my quad runner.
Well, if you take your quad runner from Honda of San Diego, I'll take my quad runner.
We will each take a Honda quad runner from Honda of San Diego. They have excellent acceleration and superb rideability. And aren't they #1 in sales, Matt?
That's right, Chad, not to mention great gas mileage. And did you know that...
Do we have enough money to finish this turkey yet?
Yeah, sure. Give him hell, guys.
And once again, yeah, this ended up doing shockingly good business for New World on home video, so this time the producers, director John DeBello and his crew opted to try and rig the rag out and see just how much juice was actually in there, using the same formula as other suddenly popular underground properties like the Toxic Avenger and Ninja Turtles were using at the dawn of the 1990s. Yeah, they did a cartoon and a line of action figures, mostly based on expanding the premise of Return to actually feature the giant tomatoes again, and this time giving them faces like they'd had on the posters, and personalities, costumes, various powers, etc.
To the which we speak, except when he has the killer technique. Tomatoes, tomatoes!
The toys were cute and the show was not without its charms, though it ultimately only ran 2 seasons, the first of which did decent ratings and the second of which did not. But that first successful season and the first 2 made money and don't cost a lot proof of concept got the tomatoes as actual characters now aesthetic carried over into 2 more sequels. No, really.
Thank God! I actually thought you were a killer tomato.
Killer Tomatoes Strike Back is probably the least of the franchise, unfortunately. A sort of meandering neo-noir spoof and kinda toothless satire of early 90s media trends, with Dr. Gangrene masquerading as a Geraldo Rivera, Phil Donahue hybrid TV talk host doing a mind control with TV satellite thing.
You'll never get away with this, Geronihue.
Get away with it, Mr. Boyle? I already have. I've kidnapped every member of the media. Have a look. See what they've resorted to.
From Washington, it's the evening news.
Americans would watch a chimp read the news. They are watching a chimp read the news.
Tomatoes, they're going into a feeding frenzy. Feeding frenzy? They hate to wait for food. You should see them at wedding receptions.
These days, it's mostly remembered for the retroactive quirk of future Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire reality TV goon Rick Rockwell playing the new lead hero, and this one really, really shitty joke.
If you want the best, forget the rest.
Look at them. They're completely hypnotized by that commercial.
When you purchase the
That's it! They've been reprogrammed with bad television.
What would you pay for all this? Don't answer, because if you order before midnight tonight, we're going to throw in absolutely free a copy of K-Smell's biggest selling album, Mike Tyson's Greatest Hits.
March 7th, Bone Crusher Smith. June 27th, Michael Spinks. August 1st, Robin Givens.
Ooh, man, the 90s really were both a long time ago and yet, unfortunately, not that long of a time ago. However, things do end on, if not a high note, at least a better note with The Killer Tomatoes Eat France.
Professor Mortimer Gangrene, tomato mastermind, scourge of civilized society, is to be freed at once. Hold still, guys. Run.
You wanna G-Wadan?
Can't take him anywhere.
Well done, lads. Well done.
Potpourri, soup du jour.
Which has probably the most elaborate-looking production of the series, and does an entertaining enough goof at the expense of the Man in the Iron Mask.
True King of France shall return with the sun. Behold, the future King of France. Professor, it's me. Yes, it's you.
Igor!
No, I am Louis, but my friends call me Francis.
Here, look. Streets run red, waters don't flow, sun don't shine, virgin weeps. King comes back. That's you.
No wonder my last name is 17th.
And other things vaguely French associated and also pulled from the animated series as a callback.
Oh my gosh.
What is it?
Well, it appears to be a giant, slobbering, somewhat overweight tomato with a cape and mask. It's Fan Tomato of the Opera! Ah! Back off! You overgrown piece of produce! Ah!
So as to go out with some pretty solid laughs overall.
That is, of course, a big square and round thing, built by someone to remember something, sometime. Ah, the famous left bank of Paris. That is a big, tall building with lots of knickknacks and stuff. It's almost finished. This is Napoleon's tomb.
None of it ever tops the first one, of course, but, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's all just fun that this both exists in the first place, and it seems to have happened for the most part without anybody getting screwed out of any rights, or the creators hating each other for whatever reason, or, you know, the kind of disasters that usually befall these semi-obscure, bizarre success stories. Some people did a thing, mostly for a laugh. It implausibly turned into a pop culture institution in a couple decades, modest profit and minor fame for most of the people involved, and most of what came out of it was just fun and silly, and people had a good time with it. You know, that's kind of nice.
We can work this out. I just need some time. I love you as much as ever, darling. Please believe me.
That's sort of one of the happier endings we get to these stories. Sometimes things can just be good. Good things can still happen. And I guess, I guess I felt like we needed to hear that again this year. More than ever. Happy Halloween, everybody, and thanks for watching Schlocktober.